Your outfit looks like you raided a thrift store dumpster. My sister Victoria laughed, her voice carrying across the entire family reunion barbecue. Everyone turned to stare at me, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. By the end of the night, they would discover that the woman they'd been mocking for years had built a fashion empire worth $52 million, and their laughter would turn to stunned silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Standing there in my grandmother's backyard, clutching a paper plate of potato salad while my entire extended family snickered at my appearance, I felt like I was 12 years old again. The same age when Victoria first told me I had no sense of style, when my cousin Marcus started calling me Goodwill Grace, when my own mother would sigh deeply and suggest maybe I should let someone else pick out my clothes for important occasions. My name is Grace Chen, and at 34 years old, I had somehow allowed my family to reduce me back to that insecure little girl who never felt like she belonged. I smoothed down my vintage band t-shirt, the one I'd carefully distressed and paired with high-waisted jeans I'd modified myself. To most people it looked casual but put together. To my family it looked like evidence of my continued failure to understand what appropriate meant. Victoria stood near the poolside bar, resplendent in her designer sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in beach waves that had definitely required a professional blowout, and her jewelry caught the late afternoon sun with the kind of sparkle that announced serious money. She was holding court with our cousins, all of them dressed in various shades of pastels and florals that screamed country club membership. I keep telling Grace she should shop at Nordstrom instead of wherever it is she finds these tragic outfits, Victoria continued, gesturing toward me with her wine glass. I mean, we're not teenagers anymore. There's a certain standard expected at family events. Marcus, Victoria's husband, and my least favorite person in the extended family, chimed in with his usual subtle cruelty. Maybe Grace is going for that bohemian artist look. You know, the whole struggling creative thing. The way he said struggling made it sound like a personal failing, a choice to remain unsuccessful when success was simply a matter of trying harder. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab my keys and drive home to my small apartment, where I could surround myself with my sketches and fabric samples and remember who I actually was when I wasn't being measured against my family's narrow definition of achievement. But instead, I stood there, taking their criticism with the same resigned patience I'd been practicing for over 2 decades. The truth was, I had stopped trying to impress my family years ago. Every attempt I'd made to gain their approval had ended in subtle humiliation. When I was 16 and saved up for months to buy what I thought was a sophisticated dress for Victoria's graduation party, my Aunt Patricia had loudly wondered if I'd gotten it from the clearance rack. When I was 22 and wore my favorite vintage blazer to my cousin's wedding, my mother had spent the entire reception apologizing to relatives for my appearance. So I'd given up. I'd decided that if they were determined to see me as the family disappointment, the creative one who would never quite get her life together, then I might as well dress the part. Let them think I shopped at thrift stores and couldn't afford better clothes. Let them believe I was still the struggling art student who needed their concerned advice about getting a real job. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to discover, was that their assumptions about my life were not just wrong but spectacularly wrong. The vintage t-shirt I was wearing wasn't from a thrift store. It was from my own fashion line, carefully designed to look effortless while incorporating subtle details that only fashion insiders would recognize. The jeans had been modified using techniques I'd developed during my years studying fashion design in New York. Even my supposedly cheap accessories were prototypes from my upcoming collection. But the biggest secret, the one that made their condescending comments almost amusing, was that Grace Chen, the struggling artist, hadn't existed for over 6 years. Instead, I had built something they couldn't even imagine, something that would have shocked them into silence if they'd known. Victoria was still talking, her voice carrying that particular tone of superiority that came so naturally to her. I've offered to take Grace shopping so many times, but she always makes excuses. Some people just don't want to be helped, I suppose. My mother, Helen Chen, approached our little group with the kind of determined smile that meant she was about to try to manage an uncomfortable situation. At 62, she still carried herself with the elegant posture of someone who had worked in high-end retail her entire career. Her own outfit was impeccable, a classic shirt dress in navy blue paired with pearl accessories that suggested understated wealth. "Victoria, dear, maybe we should focus on catching up instead of fashion advice," my mother said gently, though I could see the way her eyes quickly assessed my outfit with familiar disappointment. She had long ago given up hope that I would develop what she considered appropriate taste in clothing. "I'm just saying," Victoria continued, undeterred by my mother's diplomatic intervention. "Grace has so much potential. She's actually quite pretty when she makes an effort. But this whole thrift store aesthetic just doesn't work for a woman her age." Thrift store aesthetic. The phrase hung in the air like an insult designed to sting. I looked around at my family, these people who shared my blood but seemed to understand nothing about who I really was. My Uncle Robert was nodding along with Victoria's assessment, probably relieved that the family's attention was focused on someone else's shortcomings for once. My cousin Jennifer was taking photos for her Instagram, carefully angling her phone to exclude me from the frame. This was my family. These were the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. Instead, they had spent my entire adult life treating me like a project that needed fixing, a relative who required their gentle guidance to become acceptable. Standing there in that perfectly manicured backyard, surrounded by people who saw me as lesser than, I made a decision that had been building for months. I was tired of pretending. Tired of letting them believe their version of my story. Tired of protecting their feelings by hiding my success. They wanted to judge me based on my clothes? Fine. But they were about to learn that their judgment said far more about them than it ever had about me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a contact I rarely used anymore. Elena Rodriguez had been my roommate in design school and was now the fashion editor at Style Weekly, one of the most influential fashion magazines in the country. We'd stayed close over the years, and she'd been begging me for months to do a feature story about my brand. I'd always refused, preferring to keep my personal life separate from my professional success. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the perfect time to let my family see exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. "Hey Elena," I typed quickly. "Remember that feature story you wanted to do? I'm ready. Can you have someone here tonight?" Her response came back within seconds. "Are you serious?" "Yes. I can have a photographer and reporter there in an hour. What changed your mind?" I looked up at Victoria, who was still explaining to anyone who would listen how I could improve my appearance with just a little effort and better shopping choices. "Family reunion," I typed back. "Time for some truth." The irony wasn't lost on me. My family thought I needed their advice about
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Fashion and success, when in reality I had achieved more in the fashion industry than any of them could imagine. But they had never bothered to ask about my work, never shown interest in my actual life, beyond their surface-level judgments about my appearance. They were about to get the education of their lives. While Victoria continued her impromptu seminar on appropriate family gathering attire, I thought back to how this all began. How a girl who was constantly criticized for her fashion choices had somehow ended up building a fashion empire in secret. It started in college, when I was studying art with a focus on textile design. My professors recognized something in my work that my family never had, a unique perspective that combined classical techniques with contemporary edge. While my relatives were suggesting I consider more practical career paths, my design professors were encouraging me to think bigger, to consider fashion school, to pursue my obvious talent. The transition from art student to fashion design student happened during my junior year, when I transferred to Parsons School of Design in New York. It was a decision that required enormous courage and financial sacrifice, funded by student loans and part-time jobs that left me exhausted but exhilarated. My family had been skeptical about the move, viewing it as another example of my impractical artistic tendencies. Fashion design isn't a real career, my father had said when I announced my transfer. It's a hobby for rich people. You need to think about your future, Grace. But New York changed everything. Surrounded by other students who shared my passion, working with professors who had decades of industry experience, I discovered that my unique perspective was actually my greatest strength. While other students focused on creating dramatic runway pieces, I was drawn to elevating everyday clothing, finding ways to make ordinary garments extraordinary through subtle details and innovative construction. My senior thesis project was a collection of what I called stealth luxury pieces that looked casual but incorporated high-end techniques and materials. The concept was clothing that could pass for simple thrift store finds, but were actually sophisticated design pieces for people who preferred understated elegance to obvious status symbols. The collection caught the attention of several industry professionals, including a buyer from a boutique chain who offered to carry my pieces in their stores. It was a small start, but it was a start. After graduation, I stayed in New York, working as a design assistant for an established fashion house while developing my own line on the side. The work was grueling, involving 18-hour days and constant rejection, but I was building something. Creating a brand that reflected my values and aesthetic rather than trying to fit into someone else's vision of what fashion should be. The breakthrough came 3 years after graduation, when a celebrity stylist discovered one of my pieces at a small boutique in Soho. She styled her client in my design for a major red carpet event, and the subtle, sophisticated piece caught the attention of fashion editors and influencers. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who had created this beautifully understated dress that looked effortless but was clearly the work of a master craftsperson. Orders started pouring in, not just from boutiques, but from major department stores and online retailers. Within 6 months, I had to hire a production team and find a larger studio space. Within a year, my stealth luxury concept had become a full-fledged fashion line, with a waiting list of customers who appreciated the idea of luxury without logos, sophistication without showiness. But the real transformation happened when I made the decision to move my operations online. Instead of trying to compete with established fashion houses for retail space, I built a direct-to-consumer brand that used social media and word-of-mouth marketing to reach customers who valued quality and design over brand recognition. The strategy worked beyond my wildest expectations. My online following grew exponentially, driven by customers who loved the idea of owning beautifully designed pieces that looked like treasured vintage finds, but were actually contemporary creations made with sustainable materials and ethical labor practices. Within 4 years, my brand, which I called Found Treasures, was generating millions in revenue. The name was a deliberate nod to the thrift store aesthetic my family always mocked, but it represented something deeper. The idea that true value wasn't always obvious on the surface, that sometimes the most beautiful things were the ones that didn't scream for attention. By year 5, I had expanded into accessories, home goods, and a collaboration line with other independent designers. The business had grown beyond what I could manage alone, so I brought in a business partner and hired a full team of designers, production specialists, and marketing professionals. And now, 6 years after graduation, I was standing in my family's backyard while they criticized my fashion choices, completely unaware that the woman they were dismissing as a struggling artist was actually the founder and creative director of a $52 million fashion empire. The irony was almost too perfect. They thought I needed their advice about shopping and style, when fashion industry insiders regularly sought my opinion on trends and design. They worried about my financial stability, when I owned property in 3 cities and had enough money invested to retire comfortably tomorrow if I chose to. But more than the money, more than the success, what they had missed was the person I had become. The confidence I had gained from building something meaningful. The relationships I had formed with customers who appreciated my work. The satisfaction of creating beautiful things that brought joy to people's lives. They saw my casual clothes and assumed failure. They heard about my creative work and imagined struggle. They had constructed an entire narrative about my life, based on their own limited understanding of what success looked like. Tonight, that narrative was about to change. Elena's photographer arrived first. A young woman named Sam, who carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to working in high-pressure situations. She began setting up lighting equipment near the pool area, drawing curious looks from my relatives who couldn't figure out why professional photography equipment was appearing at their family barbecue. "Grace?" Victoria approached me with a puzzled expression. "What's going on? Who are these people?" I smiled, feeling calmer than I had all evening. "Just some friends from work. They wanted to document the family gathering for a project they're working on." It wasn't entirely a lie. Elena was a friend, and this would definitely be a project. Just not the kind of project Victoria was imagining. The reporter arrived 10 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who immediately began taking notes about the setting and the gathered family members. Elena herself showed up shortly after, her editor's eye quickly assessing the scene and the potential for the story she had been wanting to tell for months. "Grace," she said, giving me a quick hug, "I can't believe you're finally ready to do this. The timing couldn't be better. We're planning a feature series on hidden fashion entrepreneurs, designers who have built major brands without the typical industry fanfare." My family was watching these interactions with growing curiosity and, in Victoria's case, visible irritation. She clearly didn't like being excluded from whatever was happening, and she especially didn't like the way these professional, sophisticated people were treating me with obvious respect and familiarity. "Grace," my mother approached cautiously, "perhaps you could introduce us to your friends?" Before I could respond, Elena stepped forward with the confident smile of someone accustomed to working with high-profile subjects. "I'm Elena Rodriguez, fashion editor at Style Weekly magazine. We're here to interview Grace for a cover story we're running next month about innovative fashion entrepreneurs." The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. My mother's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Victoria's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Marcus actually stopped mid-conversation with my uncle to stare at our little group. "Cover story?" my mother repeated, as if the words didn't make sense in the context of her daughter who couldn't dress appropriately for family gatherings. "Grace hasn't told you?" Elena's surprise seemed genuine. "She's one of the most successful, independent fashion designers in the country. Her brand, Found Treasures, is revolutionizing how people think about luxury fashion." I watched my family's faces as Elena's words sank in. The confusion, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation of everything they thought they knew about my life. It was like watching people realize they had been living in an alternate reality. Victoria was the first to find her voice. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. Grace doesn't work in fashion. She does art projects." Elena laughed, not unkindly, but with the kind of amusement that comes from encountering an unexpected misunderstanding. "Art projects?" Grace's designs are sold in boutiques across the country. Her online following includes celebrities, influencers, and fashion insiders. She was featured in Vogue last year as one of the top emerging designers to watch. Vogue. The word hung in the air like a revelation. My family knew enough about fashion to understand what being featured in Vogue meant. It wasn't something that happened to people who shopped at thrift stores or couldn't afford proper clothes. "I don't understand," my mother said slowly. "Grace, you never mentioned any of this." I looked around at their faces, seeing years of assumptions crumbling in real time. "You never asked," I said simply. "Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject or offered advice about getting a more practical job." The photographer was capturing everything: the family's shocked expressions, the elegant setup Elena's team had arranged, the obvious disconnect between how my relatives had perceived me and the reality of who I actually was. "Would you mind if we did a quick interview here?" Elena asked my family. "It would be wonderful to get your perspective on Grace's success for the article." Victoria looked like she had swallowed something unpleasant. The woman who had spent the entire evening critiquing my fashion choices was being asked to comment on my success in the fashion industry. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a designer knife. As Elena began setting up for the interview, I caught sight of my reflection in the sliding glass door, the vintage t-shirt, the modified jeans, the carefully casual accessories. For the first time in years, I saw my outfit the way Elena and her team saw it. Not as evidence of poor taste or financial struggle, but as the carefully curated aesthetic of someone who understood fashion well enough to make it look effortless. My family was about to learn that everything they thought they knew about style, success, and their own daughter was wrong. And I was going to enjoy every minute of their education. The transformation in the backyard atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. What had been a casual family gathering suddenly felt like a professional photo shoot, with Elena's team efficiently transforming the space into something magazine-worthy. Sam positioned reflectors to catch the golden hour light filtering through my grandmother's oak trees, while the reporter arranged seating to create an intimate interview setting. My relatives gathered in small clusters, whispering among themselves and shooting uncertain glances in my direction. The woman they had been treating as the family disappointment was suddenly the center of attention from people who clearly knew what they were talking about when it came to fashion and success. "Grace," Elena said, settling into the chair across from where I would be interviewed. "Before we start, I want you to know how excited we are to finally tell your story. Found Treasures has been on our radar for years, but you've been so private about your personal life. What made you decide to open up now?" I glanced toward Victoria, who was standing close enough to overhear but trying to appear nonchalant. "I realized it was time to stop hiding who I really am," I said. "Sometimes we let other people's expectations shape how we present ourselves to the world. Tonight felt like the right time to change that." The interview began with Elena asking about the founding of Found Treasures, and I found myself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of discussing my work with someone who understood the industry. I explained the concept behind stealth luxury, the philosophy of creating beautiful things that didn't need to announce their value through obvious branding or flashy design. "It's about confidence," I said, warming to the subject that had driven my career for the past 6 years. "When you're secure in your own taste and style, you don't need external validation through status symbols. The clothes I design are for people who know quality when they see it, even if others don't recognize it immediately." As I spoke, I was aware of my family listening to every word. They were hearing me discuss concepts they had never imagined I understood, talking about a business world they didn't know I inhabited, describing achievements they had never bothered to ask about. "Your aesthetic is so distinctive," Elena continued. "To someone who doesn't know fashion, your designs might look simple or even casual. But there's incredible sophistication in the construction and materials. How did you develop that approach?" I smiled, thinking about all the times my family had dismissed my fashion choices as evidence of poor taste. I've always been drawn to things that are beautiful without being obvious about it. I think there's something powerful about understated elegance, about clothes that whisper instead of shout. Sam was capturing everything with her camera, documenting not just the interview but the family dynamics playing out in the background. Victoria kept moving closer, clearly straining to hear every detail of the conversation. Marcus had his phone out, undoubtedly searching for information about Found Treasures online. "Let's talk numbers," Elena said, pulling out her tablet. "Your company's growth has been extraordinary. Can you give our readers a sense of the scale we're talking about?" This was the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading. The moment when my family would learn exactly how wrong their assumptions about my life had been. "This year we're projecting $52 million in revenue," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. "We've grown from a one-person operation to a team of 45 employees. Our customer base includes celebrities, fashion insiders, and discerning shoppers who appreciate quality design." The silence from my family was deafening. I could see Victoria's mouth hanging slightly open, my mother's hand pressed to her chest in shock, Marcus staring at his phone screen with an expression of disbelief. $52 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge to everything they had believed about success and achievement. This was more money than any of them had imagined possible, certainly more than they had ever associated with their struggling artist relative. "What's particularly impressive," Elena continued, "is that you've built this empire while maintaining complete creative control. You've never had to compromise your vision to fit market expectations or investor demands." "That was always important to me," I said. "I wanted to create something authentic, something that reflected my actual values, rather than what I thought would sell." It turns out there are a lot of people who appreciate that approach. The reporter jumped in with follow-up questions about my design process, my business philosophy, my plans for expansion. With each answer, I could see my family's understanding of my life shifting fundamentally. The daughter and sister they had been offering career advice to was actually running a major fashion company. The woman they worried about financially was wealthy beyond their imagination. "Grace," Elena said, "I have to ask about your personal style. You're known for wearing your own designs in public, but your look is so understated that most people probably don't recognize they're seeing high-end fashion pieces. Is that intentional?" I laughed, glancing pointedly at Victoria. "Absolutely intentional. I design clothes for people who are confident enough to let their personality shine through rather than letting their clothing do all the talking. Everything I'm wearing tonight is from my current collection, but it's designed to look effortless." Victoria's face had gone through several color changes during the interview, from confusion to shock to what looked like embarrassment. She was beginning to understand that her earlier comments about my thrift store aesthetic had been not just wrong but spectacularly ironic. "The t-shirt?" Elena asked, gesturing to my vintage band tee. "Hand-distressed using a technique I developed to recreate authentic vintage wear patterns. The fabric is organic cotton sourced from a cooperative in Peru. It retails for $250. My mother made a small choking sound. $250 for what she had assumed was a cheap t-shirt from a discount store. The jeans? Modified using construction techniques I learned from studying vintage Levi's. Each pair takes 8 hours of handwork to achieve this look. They're $450. Marcus was frantically scrolling through what I assumed was the Found Treasures website, probably trying to verify these impossible-sounding prices. "And the accessories?" "Prototypes from our upcoming collection. The bag is handcrafted Italian leather. The jewelry is designed in collaboration with an artist who works with recycled metals. The whole outfit represents about $1,200 in retail value. But more importantly, it represents my philosophy about fashion. $1,200 for an outfit my family had been mocking as evidence of my poor taste and financial struggles." The irony was so complete it was almost poetic. Elena wrapped up the formal interview portion and began directing Sam to take photos for the magazine spread. They wanted shots of me in different areas of the backyard, images that would show both my personal style and the family context of the story. As the photo session progressed, my relatives slowly began approaching, their earlier condescension replaced by curiosity and what looked like embarrassment. My mother was the first to reach me during a break between setups. "Grace, honey," she said, her voice uncertain, "I had no idea. When you said you were working in fashion, I thought you meant retail, or maybe as an assistant somewhere. I tried to tell you about my work," I said gently, "but every time I brought it up, you seemed worried that I wasn't being practical enough. So I stopped sharing." "But $52 million, she said, as if the number still didn't make sense. "How is that possible? You're so young." Victoria approached more cautiously, clearly struggling with how to address her earlier comments. "Grace, I owe you an apology. I had no idea about your success. If I had known..." "If you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently?" I asked. "The clothes I'm wearing tonight are the same clothes you were criticizing an hour ago. Nothing about my appearance has changed, except your knowledge of what these pieces cost." She flinched at the directness of my response. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it though?" I said, not unkindly but firmly. "You've spent years assuming I needed your fashion advice because you equated my casual style with poor taste or financial struggle. But you never considered that maybe I dress this way because I'm confident enough in my own aesthetic to not need external validation." The photographer was capturing these interactions, documenting the family dynamics that would add depth to the magazine's story. Elena had specifically mentioned wanting to explore the theme of hidden success, the way families sometimes failed to recognize achievement that didn't fit their expectations. Marcus joined our group, his phone still in his hand. "I've been looking at your website," he said, his voice slightly odd. "These prices are incredible. And the customer reviews. People are calling your designs life-changing. Fashion can be transformative when it helps people feel confident in their own skin," I said. "That's what I try to create. Clothes that make people feel like the best version of themselves." As the evening progressed and Elena's team finished their work, my family began asking the questions they should have been asking for years. About my design process, my business philosophy, my plans for the future. They wanted to understand how they had missed something so significant happening right under their noses. The truth was, they had missed it because they had never really looked. They had constructed an image of who I was based on surface-level observations and had never bothered to dig deeper. They had assumed that because I didn't fit their definition of success, I wasn't successful. The feature will run in next month's issue, Elena told me as her team packed up their equipment. It's going to be beautiful. The photos Sam captured tonight perfectly illustrate the disconnect between perception and reality. After the magazine team left, my family and I found ourselves sitting around my grandmother's patio table, the same space where I had been criticized for my outfit just a few hours earlier. The atmosphere was completely different now, charged with new understanding and lingering embarrassment. I keep thinking about all the times I offered to take you shopping, Victoria said quietly. All the advice about getting a real job, about being more practical. I feel like such an idiot. You're not an idiot, I said. You just made assumptions based on limited information. But maybe this can be a lesson about not judging people's choices when you don't understand their circumstances. My Uncle Robert, who had been largely silent during the evening's revelations, finally spoke up. Grace, I have to ask, why did you keep this secret from us? Why let us think you were struggling when you had built something so successful? It was the question I had been expecting, and I had given it a lot of thought over the years. Because I wanted to know who I was to you beyond my bank account, I said. I wanted to understand whether your love and acceptance were conditional on my success. And honestly, I got tired of trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth taking seriously. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. My family was realizing that their treatment of me had revealed more about their values than mine. What happens now? My mother asked. With the magazine story? With your business? Now I keep doing what I've been doing, I said. Creating beautiful things. Building a business I'm proud of. Living authentically, instead of trying to meet other people's expectations. As the evening wound down and relatives began saying their goodbyes, the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of offering unwanted advice about my appearance or career choices, they were asking genuine questions about my work and expressing admiration for what I had accomplished. But more than their newfound respect, what mattered to me was the liberation of finally being seen for who I really was. No more hiding my success, no more pretending to be less than I was to make others comfortable. The girl who had been criticized for her thrift store aesthetic had built a fashion empire worth $52 million. And she had done it while staying true to her own vision of what beautiful clothing could be. As I drove home that night, still wearing my supposedly inappropriate outfit that had sparked such strong opinions, I felt a sense of completion. The secret was out, the judgment had been reversed, and my family finally understood that success comes in many forms. Sometimes the people who understand style the least are the ones most eager to give style advice. And sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that don't announce their worth to the world. I had learned both lessons well and built a fortune proving them true. The magazine hit newsstands 3 weeks later, and my phone started ringing before I even finished my morning coffee. The cover featured a stunning photograph of me sitting in my grandmother's garden, wearing what looked like a simple outfit but was actually a carefully curated ensemble worth over $1,000. The headline read, "Hidden Empire: How Grace Chen Built a Fashion Fortune While Her Family Thought She Was Broke." Elena had done exactly what she promised. The article was a masterpiece of storytelling, weaving together my business success with the family dynamics that had kept it hidden for so long. The photos Sam had taken captured not just my designs but the moment of revelation, the shocked faces of my relatives as they learned the truth about my life. Within hours of the magazine's release, my website crashed from the sudden influx of traffic. My assistant Mara called me in a panic, explaining that orders were pouring in faster than our system could process them. The exposure from Style Weekly had introduced found treasures to an entirely new audience, People who were fascinated by the concept of luxury fashion that didn't look like luxury fashion. But the real impact wasn't on my business, which was already successful enough to handle the surge. The real impact was on my family relationships, which had been fundamentally altered by that evening in my grandmother's backyard. Victoria was the first to reach out, calling me 2 days after the magazine appeared in stores. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, lacking the confident authority she usually projected. "Grace, I've been thinking about what happened at the reunion," she began, her words careful and measured. "I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you an explanation." I settled into my favorite chair in my apartment, the one positioned near the window that overlooked the city where I had built my empire in secret. "I'm listening." "I've been jealous of you for years," she said, the admission clearly difficult for her. "Not of your clothes or your lifestyle, obviously I thought you were struggling financially, but jealous of your confidence, your ability to not care what other people thought. I've spent my entire adult life trying to live up to other people's expectations, and you just seemed so free from all of that." It was the last thing I had expected her to say. Victoria, jealous of me? The sister who had everything I was supposedly lacking according to our family's value system? "I don't understand," I said honestly. "You have everything our family considers important. The successful husband, the beautiful house, the perfect appearance. You've always been held up as the example I should follow." "And it's exhausting," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Do you know how much energy it takes to maintain the image everyone expects from me? The constant shopping, the perfect hair, the right social events, the appropriate responses to everything. I look at you and you just seem so comfortable in your own skin." I thought about this revelation as I watched people hurrying past my window, each focused on their own version of success and happiness. Victoria, I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. Not around family, anyway. I felt judged and criticized and never good enough. "But that's just it," she said. "You built this incredible business while feeling that way. You achieved something amazing, without needing anyone's approval or permission. I've been so busy seeking approval that I've never actually accomplished anything that was entirely my own." This conversation was revealing layers of family dynamics I had never fully understood. While I had been feeling inadequate and criticized, Victoria had been feeling trapped by the very expectations that our family used to measure success. "The magazine article made me realize something," she continued. "I've been criticizing your choices not because they were wrong, but because they represented a freedom I was too afraid to claim for myself." Quote, "We talked for over an hour, dissecting years of misunderstandings and missed connections." Victoria admitted that she had often wanted to dress more casually, to care less about appearances, to pursue creative interests that might not meet family expectations. But she had been trapped by the role she had accepted as the successful, put-together daughter. "I want to learn from you," she said finally. "Not about fashion, obviously, you know more about that than I ever realized. But about how to live authentically, how to build something meaningful without constantly seeking validation from others." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the complexity of family relationships, how everyone could be struggling with different aspects of the same system while being unaware of each other's internal battles. My mother called that afternoon, her approach characteristically more direct than Victoria's soul-searching. "Grace, I need you to help me understand something," she said without preamble. "How did I miss this? How did I completely fail to see that my own daughter had built a multi-million-dollar business?" It was a fair question, one I had been considering myself since the magazine article forced everything into the open. "You saw what you expected to see," I said. "When I told you I was working in fashion, you assumed I meant retail or assistant work, because that fit your understanding of what was realistic for someone like me. When I talked about my designs, you heard hobby rather than profession, because that's what made sense in your worldview." "But I'm your mother," she said, frustration clear in her voice. "I should have asked more questions. I should have been more interested in your actual life instead of focusing on what I thought your life should look like." I could hear genuine regret in her voice, the pain of a parent realizing they had misunderstood their child in fundamental ways. The article mentioned that you tried to talk about your work with us, but we kept changing the subject, she continued. I keep thinking about all those conversations where I offered career advice instead of asking about what you were actually doing. I stopped sharing because it felt like you had already decided what kind of person I was, I admitted. Every time I mentioned my successes, you seemed worried that I was being unrealistic. So I learned to keep my professional life separate from my family life. That must have been incredibly lonely, she said quietly. It had been lonely. Building a business while feeling like you couldn't share your excitement or challenges with the people closest to you created a strange kind of isolation. I had celebrated my biggest victories with my team and my friends in the industry, but never with my family. I want to change that, my mother said. I want to really understand your work, your business, your life. Not so I can offer advice, but so I can actually know who my daughter is. Over the following weeks, my relationship with my family underwent a gradual transformation. Instead of offering unsolicited advice about my appearance or career choices, they began asking genuine questions about my industry, my design philosophy, my business challenges. Marcus, who had always been the most dismissive of my creative pursuits, surprised me by requesting a consultation for his law firm's office redesign. He had been impressed by the way I had created a sophisticated aesthetic that didn't rely on obvious status symbols, and he wanted to apply that approach to his professional environment. I realize I've been thinking about image all wrong, he told me during our meeting at his downtown office. I thought success meant having the most expensive everything, the kind of furniture and art that announced how much money the firm was making. But after seeing your approach to fashion, I'm wondering if there's a more sophisticated way to project confidence. We spent several hours discussing the concept of understated luxury, how quality and craftsmanship could communicate more effectively than price tags and brand names. Marcus was approaching the conversation with the same analytical mind he brought to legal problems, genuinely curious about the principles behind aesthetic choices. It's like the clothes you were wearing at the reunion, he said. To someone who didn't know better, they looked casual, maybe even cheap, but to someone who understood fashion, they were clearly expensive and well-made. There's something powerful about that kind of confidence. Working with Marcus gave me insight into how profoundly the magazine article had affected my family's understanding of expertise and success. They were beginning to recognize that I had developed real knowledge in an area they had dismissed, that my perspective might actually be valuable rather than something to be corrected. The business impact of the Style Weekly feature continued to ripple outward in ways I hadn't anticipated. Fashion bloggers and influencers began analyzing my designs with new interest, breaking down the techniques and philosophy behind pieces they had previously overlooked. Several major retailers reached out about carrying found treasures in their stores, offers that would have represented enormous growth opportunities. But the most meaningful response came from customers who connected with the story behind the brand. I started receiving emails from people who felt seen and understood by the concept of fashion that didn't need to announce itself. Women who had felt excluded from high-end fashion because they preferred subtlety to flashiness. People who had been judged for their aesthetic choices by family members who didn't understand their perspective. One email in particular stayed with me, from a woman named Sarah who worked as a librarian in a small town where her thrift store finds and vintage pieces were constantly criticized by relatives who thought she should dress more appropriately for her age and profession. Reading your story helped me realize that style isn't about meeting other people's expectations, she wrote. It's about understanding what makes you feel confident and authentic. I've started wearing your pieces to family gatherings, and even though they look casual to my relatives, I know I'm wearing beautifully made clothes that reflect my actual taste, rather than what other people think I should like. These responses reinforced my belief that fashion could be a tool for empowerment, a way for people to express their authentic selves, even when others didn't understand or appreciate their choices. The success of the article also brought new opportunities within the fashion industry. Elena introduced me to other designers and business leaders who shared my philosophy about creating meaningful work, rather than simply chasing trends or profits. I found myself invited to panels and conferences where I could discuss the business model behind found treasures, the strategies that had allowed me to build a major brand without compromising my creative vision. One of these events led to an unexpected collaboration with Maya Patel, a sustainable textile designer whose work I had admired for years. Maya had built her own company creating innovative fabrics from recycled materials. and she was interested in working with designers who prioritized substance over spectacle. Your approach reminds me of the traditional craft movements, Maya told me over dinner after a panel we had both participated in. There's something powerful about creating beautiful things that don't need external validation. The work speaks for itself. We began developing a capsule collection that would combine her sustainable textiles with my design philosophy, creating pieces that looked effortlessly casual but incorporated cutting-edge environmental innovations. The collaboration represented everything I valued about the fashion industry: creativity, craftsmanship, and meaningful innovation, rather than empty glamour. As autumn arrived and the initial excitement around the magazine article settled into steady business growth, I realized that the most significant change hadn't been in my professional life, which had been thriving long before my family learned about it. The real transformation had been in my personal relationships and my own sense of authenticity. For the first time in years, I could attend family gatherings without feeling defensive about my choices or defensive about my success. I no longer had to hide who I was or pretend to be less accomplished to make others comfortable. The relief of living openly was more valuable than any business achievement. Victoria and I began having regular coffee dates, conversations that explored topics we had never discussed before. She was genuinely curious about the creative process behind fashion design, and I was learning about the challenges of maintaining the perfect image she had felt pressured to project. "I've started dressing differently," she told me during one of our meetings. "Nothing dramatic, but I'm choosing clothes based on what I actually like rather than what I think I'm supposed to wear. It's small, but it feels revolutionary." These changes in Victoria reflected broader shifts happening throughout my family. My mother had begun asking about my work with genuine interest, requesting updates about new collections and business developments. She still didn't fully understand the fashion industry, but she was making an effort to learn about something that mattered to me. Even my father, who had always been the most skeptical about creative careers, surprised me by framing one of the magazine photos and hanging it in his office. When I asked him about it, he said he was proud to show people that his daughter had built something significant in a field he had never understood. I realize I spent too many years worrying about practical concerns and not enough time appreciating what you were actually accomplishing, he told me. This picture reminds me to ask better questions and make fewer assumptions. The holiday season brought our first family gathering since the reunion, where everything had changed. Thanksgiving dinner was held at my parents' house, the same dining room where I had endured years of gentle suggestions about improving my appearance and career prospects. But this year was different. Instead of criticism or unwanted advice, I found myself fielding genuine questions about my work and my perspectives on fashion and business. My teenage niece Emma, Victoria's daughter, was particularly interested in hearing about the entrepreneurial aspects of building a company. "I've been following Found Treasures on social media," Emma told me as we helped clear dishes after dinner. "The behind-the-scenes content is so cool. I never realized how much work went into making clothes that look simple. Most people don't realize how much intention goes into creating something that appears effortless," I said. "That's kind of the point. The best design work is invisible to the casual observer, but incredibly meaningful to the people who experience it." Emma was studying business in high school and considering fashion merchandising for college. Having a successful entrepreneur in the family had given her permission to consider creative industries as viable career paths rather than impractical dreams. "My friends think it's so cool that my aunt is featured in magazines," she said. "But what I think is coolest is that you built something entirely your own. You didn't have to work for someone else's company or follow someone else's vision." Talking with Emma reminded me of my own teenage years, when I had felt pressure to choose practical paths over creative ones. Having family support for her interests might allow her to pursue her passions with confidence rather than secrecy. As the evening wound down, I found myself in the kitchen with my mother, packaging leftovers and reflecting on how much had changed since the previous year. "I've been thinking about what you said," my mother told me as we worked side by side, about how we saw what we expected to see instead of what was actually there. "I realize I did that with all my children, not just you." She went on to explain how she had made assumptions about Victoria's happiness based on NAFL, external markers of success, never recognizing the pressure and anxiety that came with maintaining a perfect image. How she had assumed Marcus was fulfilled in his legal career without asking whether he found the work meaningful. How she had focused on practical concerns rather than understanding what actually motivated each of her children. The magazine article was a wake-up call, she said. Not just about your success, but about how much I didn't know about any of my children's inner lives. This conversation led to a broader family discussion about expectations and assumptions, about the difference between supporting someone and controlling their choices. My parents acknowledged that their concern about practical careers had sometimes prevented them from celebrating creative achievements or unconventional paths to success. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Old patterns of thinking don't disappear overnight, and there were still moments when family members caught themselves making assumptions or offering unwanted advice. But there was genuine effort to understand rather than judge, to ask questions rather than provide answers. As winter approached and the fashion industry began preparing for spring collections, I found myself in a position I had never imagined. Not just as a successful designer, but as someone who had achieved professional success without sacrificing personal authenticity. The business continued to grow, but more importantly, I was able to share that growth with family members who finally understood what I had been building. The girl who had been criticized for her thrift store aesthetic had not only built a fashion empire, but had also transformed her family's understanding of success, creativity, and the courage required to live authentically. The secret was no longer secret, and the judgment had been replaced with respect and genuine curiosity. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply being yourself, consistently and confidently, until the world catches up to your vision. Found Treasures had become more than a fashion brand. It had become proof that authentic success looks different from conventional expectations, and that the most valuable things often hide in plain sight. The invitation arrived on heavyweight paper with elegant typography that immediately caught my attention. Fashion Week had always been a distant dream, something I observed from the outside through social media and industry publications. But here was a formal request for Found Treasures to participate in New York Fashion Week's Emerging Designers Showcase, complete with runway show and press coverage. My hands trembled slightly as I read the details. This wasn't just any invitation. It was recognition from the industry's most prestigious platform that my work deserved to be seen alongside the world's most celebrated designers. The timing felt symbolic, coming exactly 1 year after that transformative evening at my grandmother's barbecue when my family had learned the truth about my success. Mara burst into my studio office, her excitement barely contained. "Grace, did you see the email from Fashion Week? They want us for the main showcase, not just the emerging talent section." "Do you understand what this means?" I understood perfectly. This was the opportunity that most designers spent their entire careers working toward. A chance to present my vision on the world's most watched fashion stage, to prove that understated luxury deserved a place among the industry's most celebrated aesthetics. "What's our timeline?" I asked, my mind already racing through the logistics of creating a cohesive collection worthy of such a platform. 6 weeks, Mara said, consulting her tablet. They want 12 looks minimum, 15 maximum. The theme is hidden in plain sight, which feels like it was designed specifically for Found Treasures. Hidden in plain sight. The irony was perfect. For years, my family had looked at me and seen someone who didn't understand fashion or success, missing the empire I was building right in front of them. Now I would present that same philosophy to the fashion world's most discerning audience. The next month became a whirlwind of creative intensity unlike anything I had experienced before. My team and I worked 18-hour days, perfecting every detail of the collection that would represent not just Found Treasures, but the entire concept of beauty that doesn't need to announce itself. The lead piece was a dress that appeared to be a simple black shirt dress, the kind of garment that could be found in any department store. But closer inspection revealed hand-sewn French seams, fabric woven exclusively for us by a mill in Italy, and construction techniques that had taken months to perfect. It was everything Found Treasures represented. Apparent simplicity hiding extraordinary craftsmanship. "This is either going to be revolutionary or completely misunderstood," said James Wu, my lead pattern maker, as he examined the technical drawings for the collection's centerpiece coat. From a distance, it looked like a basic trench coat. Up close, it revealed innovative tailoring that created perfect silhouettes without any visible structure, using techniques borrowed from haute couture but adapted for ready-to-wear. That's always been the risk, I replied. But if we succeed, we'll prove that fashion can be both accessible and exceptional. As we worked, I found myself thinking about the journey that had led to this moment. The years of family gatherings where I felt invisible and inadequate. The countless times I had been advised to pursue more practical goals. The secret empire I had built, while others assumed I was struggling. All of it had contributed to the aesthetic philosophy I was now preparing to present on fashion's biggest stage. The weeks leading up to Fashion Week brought unexpected challenges. Several established designers publicly questioned whether Found Treasures belonged in the main showcase, arguing that my aesthetic was too commercial, too accessible for such a prestigious platform. True luxury requires exclusivity, declared Miranda Hayes, a veteran designer known for her elaborate gowns that regularly appeared on red carpets. What Chen is creating may be well made, but it lacks the artistry and vision that Fashion Week represents. These criticisms stung, but they also reinforced why my work mattered. The fashion industry had long perpetuated the idea that beauty required inaccessibility, that true style could only be achieved through obvious displays of wealth and status. I was proposing something different, fashion that derived its power from confidence and craftsmanship rather than exclusivity and price tags. Elena Rodriguez defended my inclusion in a column that sparked widespread industry discussion. Grace Chen represents the future of fashion, she wrote. While other designers create clothes for the fantasy lives of their customers, Chen creates clothes for the actual lives of sophisticated women who understand that real luxury doesn't need to scream for attention. The debate surrounding my participation only increased media interest in the collection. Fashion bloggers and industry publications began analyzing my previous work with new scrutiny, trying to understand what I might present on such a significant platform. My family followed these developments with fascination and pride that still felt new to me. Victoria had become one of Found Treasures' most devoted customers, gradually replacing her obvious designer pieces with items that reflected her actual personality rather than what she thought successful women should wear. I feel like myself for the first time in years, she told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. People keep complimenting my style, but what they're really noticing is that I seem more confident, more authentic. This transformation in Victoria embodied everything I hoped to achieve with my Fashion Week presentation. The power of clothing to help people feel like the best version of themselves, rather than like someone they thought they should be. 2 weeks before the show, disaster struck. Our primary fabric supplier in Italy experienced flooding that destroyed half of our order, leaving us without enough material to complete the collection as planned. With no time to source equivalent quality fabric elsewhere, we faced the possibility of withdrawing from Fashion Week entirely. We could simplify some of the pieces, suggested Anna, my head of production, though her tone suggested she knew this wasn't really an option. Each piece in the collection had been designed to demonstrate specific techniques and concepts. Simplifying them would undermine the entire message we were trying to communicate. That's when Maya Patel, my collaborator on sustainable textiles, offered a solution that seemed impossible. "I have enough of our prototype fabric to complete your collection," she said during an emergency video call. "It's never been used for a full collection before, but the quality is exactly what you need." Maya's innovative fabric was made entirely from recycled materials, but felt and looked identical to the luxury textiles I had originally planned to use. Using it would make the collection even more meaningful, demonstrating that sustainability and luxury could coexist without compromise. "Are you sure?" I asked. "This is your life's work we're talking about. If the collection doesn't succeed, it could reflect poorly on your innovations." "Grace," Maya said with a smile, "everything you've built has been about proving that appearances can be deceiving. What better way to make that point than with fabric that looks like traditional luxury but is actually revolutionary?" The decision to use Maya's sustainable textiles added another layer of meaning to the collection. We weren't just challenging assumptions about style and status. We were proving that environmental responsibility could enhance rather than compromise aesthetic achievement. The final week before Fashion Week was a blur of fittings, technical rehearsals, and media interviews. Fashion journalists wanted to understand the philosophy behind Found Treasures, the business model that had allowed me to build a major brand without traditional fashion industry backing. "You've created something entirely new," observed David Kim, fashion critic for The Times, during a pre-show interview. "A luxury brand that doesn't rely on luxury signaling." It's simultaneously radical and completely logical. These conversations helped me articulate what I had been building intuitively for years. Found Treasures represented a different relationship between designer and customer, based on mutual respect for intelligence and taste, rather than the traditional dynamic of aspiration and exclusivity. The night before the show, I walked through the empty venue where my collection would be presented in less than 24 hours. The stark white runway stretched before me, soon to be filled with models wearing clothes that represented years of creative development and business growth. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Watching the live stream tomorrow with the whole family. We're so proud of what you've accomplished and who you've become." Reading those words, I realized how completely my relationship with my family had transformed. From criticism and misunderstanding to genuine support and pride. They still didn't fully understand the fashion industry, but they understood that I had built something meaningful and successful entirely on my own terms. The morning of the show arrived with surprising calm. My team moved with practiced efficiency, each person focused on their specific responsibilities. The models began arriving for final fittings, and I was struck by how perfectly the clothes worked on different body types and personal styles. "These pieces make me feel powerful," said Zara, the lead model, as she examined herself in the first look. "Like I could wear this anywhere and command respect without having to try too hard." That was exactly the effect I had been working toward. Clothes that enhanced the wearer's natural confidence rather than creating artificial personas. Fashion that worked for real lives rather than just special occasions. As the tour audience began filling the venue, I spotted familiar faces from across the industry. Established designers, fashion editors, buyers from major retailers, and celebrities known for their style. But I also saw newer faces, younger designers, and fashion students who represented the future of the industry. The show began at exactly 3 o'clock, with the first model walking down the runway in what appeared to be a simple white t-shirt and perfectly fitted jeans. The audience seemed puzzled at first, unsure whether this casual look belonged on such a prestigious stage. But as more models appeared, the sophistication of the collection became apparent. Each piece built on the previous one, demonstrating increasing complexity disguised as simplicity. The white t-shirt was revealed to be constructed using techniques typically reserved for evening wear. The jeans incorporated tailoring innovations that created perfect silhouettes without obvious structure. By the fifth look, a coat that seemed ordinary until the model moved and revealed its revolutionary construction, the audience was completely engaged. Fashion editors were taking notes, buyers were making calculations, and industry veterans were leaning forward to better understand what they were seeing. The climax came with the final 3 pieces: evening wear that looked effortless, but represented the pinnacle of technical achievement. A black dress that appeared simple until the light caught its hidden details. A cocktail ensemble that seemed casual, but was actually formal wear disguised as everyday luxury. A gown that looked like a perfectly fitted t-shirt dress, but moved like couture. As the last model reached the end of the runway, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to last forever. Fashion Week audiences were notoriously reserved, but this response felt different. Genuine, excited, like people had just witnessed something that would change how they thought about fashion. When I walked the runway for my designer bow, the applause intensified. Looking out at the crowd, I saw Miranda Hayes, the designer who had questioned my inclusion, clapping enthusiastically. David Kim was already typing notes on his phone. Elena Rodriguez was beaming with pride. But the most meaningful sight was the live stream setup, broadcasting this moment to viewers around the world, including my family. The people who had once criticized my fashion choices were now watching me receive a standing ovation from the fashion industry's most respected professionals. Backstage after the show was chaos in the best possible way. Fashion editors wanted interviews, buyers wanted to place orders, and other designers wanted to understand my techniques. The collection had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations, proving that there was a hungry audience for fashion that prioritized substance over spectacle. "That was revolutionary," said Carolina Herrera, approaching me with genuine admiration. "You've created something entirely new while making it look effortless. That's the mark of true mastery." The reviews that appeared over the following days exceeded anything I had dared to hope for. Fashion Week coverage typically focused on dramatic presentations and obvious luxury, but my collection had captured attention for entirely different reasons. "Grace Chen has redefined what Fashion Week can be," wrote Vogue. "Her collection proves that innovation doesn't require shock value, that luxury doesn't require exclusivity, and that the most powerful fashion statements are often the quietest ones." But beyond the professional recognition, the most gratifying response came from customers and potential customers who felt seen and understood by what I had presented. Women who had felt excluded from high fashion because they preferred understated elegance to obvious displays of wealth. People who valued quality and craftsmanship but didn't want clothes that announced their price tags. The Fashion Week presentation had accomplished everything I had hoped for and more. It established Found Treasures as a major force in contemporary fashion, while proving that my aesthetic philosophy could succeed on the industry's biggest stage. More importantly, it demonstrated that there was space in fashion for different definitions of luxury, beauty, and success. 3 months after Fashion Week, I was invited to speak at a conference for young entrepreneurs, sharing the stage with business leaders from various industries. My presentation focused on building authentic brands in environments that often pressure creators to compromise their vision for commercial success. The fashion industry told me that luxury required exclusivity. I told the audience of aspiring entrepreneurs. My family told me that success required conforming to conventional expectations. My collection at Fashion Week proved that both perspectives were wrong. After my presentation, a young designer approached me with tears in her eyes. "I've been struggling with whether to pursue my own aesthetic or create what I think will sell," she said. "Your story gives me permission to trust my own vision." These conversations reminded me why the Fashion Week success mattered beyond professional achievement. By proving that unconventional approaches could succeed on the industry's biggest stage, I had created space for other designers to pursue their authentic visions, rather than copying established formulas. The business impact of Fashion Week was immediate and substantial. Orders poured in from retailers who had previously considered Found Treasures too niche for their customers. Collaborations with other brands created opportunities to expand the aesthetic philosophy into new product categories. Celebrity stylists began incorporating my pieces into red carpet looks that redefined glamour as confidence rather than ostentation. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the way Fashion Week had changed my relationship with the industry itself. I was no longer an outsider trying to prove my worth. I was an established voice contributing to conversations about fashion's future. The girl who had been mocked for her thrift store aesthetic had not only built a fashion empire, but had used the industry's most prestigious platform to validate the very approach her family had once criticized. The secret had become a statement, and the judgment had been transformed into admiration. Standing in my expanded studio 6 months after Fashion Week, surrounded by sketches for upcoming collections and samples of new innovations, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. From family gatherings where I felt invisible to Fashion Week stages where I commanded attention, all while staying true to the aesthetic philosophy that had always guided my work. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply be yourself, consistently and confidently, until the world recognizes the value of what you're offering. Found Treasures had become more than a successful business. It had become proof that authentic vision, pursued with unwavering dedication, could change entire industries. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 18 months after my Fashion Week triumph. I was reviewing sketches for the fall collection when my assistant announced that Anna Wintour's office was on the line. Even after all my success, hearing that name still made my heart skip a beat. "Ms. Chen," came the crisp, authoritative voice of Vogue's editor-in-chief. "I have a proposition that I believe will interest you greatly. We're planning our September issue around the theme of authenticity in fashion. And I want Found Treasures to be the cover story. The cover of Vogue, the pinnacle of fashion recognition, the ultimate validation that I had truly arrived in an industry that had once seemed impossibly distant. But Anna Wintour wasn't finished. More than that, she continued, we want to document your story from the beginning, the family who didn't understand your vision, the business you built in secret, the way you've challenged every assumption about luxury and success. This isn't just about clothes, Grace. This is about revolution. 3 weeks later, I found myself back at my grandmother's house. The same backyard where my family had once mocked my outfit choices now transformed into a high-end photo shoot location. Vogue's team had arrived with lighting equipment that rivaled major film productions, makeup artists who typically worked with A-list celebrities, and a photographer whose portfolio included the most iconic fashion images of the past decade. But the most surreal aspect wasn't the professional crew or the elaborate setup. It was watching my family interact with this world they had never imagined their daughter and sister inhabited. Victoria stood off to the side, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief as she watched makeup artists prepare me for what would become one of fashion's most talked-about cover shoots. I keep thinking about that night, she whispered to me during a break between shots. When I said your outfit looked like you raided a thrift store dumpster. Now here's Vogue, in our grandmother's backyard, because they want to celebrate the exact aesthetic I was making fun of. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The setting that had once witnessed my humiliation was now the backdrop for my ultimate professional triumph. The family who had worried about my fashion choices were now watching the fashion industry's most prestigious publications celebrate those very choices. The photographer Marcus Hendricks was known for his ability to capture the essence of his subjects rather than just their surface appearance. I want to show the confidence that comes from knowing who you are, he explained as he adjusted the lighting. Grace, your entire brand is built on the idea that true luxury doesn't need external validation. I want that philosophy to come through in every frame. The resulting images were unlike anything I had seen in fashion photography. Instead of the polished perfection typical of Vogue covers, these photos captured something more complex and authentic. They showed a woman comfortable in her own skin, wearing clothes that enhanced rather than disguised her personality. One photograph in particular became iconic, me sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, wearing what appeared to be a simple sweater and jeans, but which eagle-eyed fashion observers would recognize as pieces from my most exclusive collection. The image perfectly encapsulated the Found Treasures philosophy: luxury hiding in plain sight, accessible elegance that didn't need to announce itself. This cover is going to change how people think about fashion photography, predicted Sarah Martinez, Vogue's creative director, as she reviewed the preliminary shots. It's intimate, authentic, revolutionary. Everything fashion has been moving away from, which makes it exactly what fashion needs right now. The article that accompanied the cover story was written by Elena Rodriguez, whose original feature had started this entire journey. She had followed my career transformation with the dedication of someone who understood the broader implications of what I was achieving. Grace Chen represents more than just a successful designer, Elena wrote in the Vogue piece. She represents a fundamental shift in how we define luxury, success, and authenticity in an industry built on aspiration and exclusivity. Her story challenges readers to examine their own assumptions about value, beauty, and the courage required to remain true to yourself when the world expects you to be someone else. The article delved deep into the family dynamics that had shaped my perspective, including interviews with Victoria, my mother, and even Marcus, who had become one of Found Treasure's most unlikely advocates. Their perspectives added layers to the story that transformed it from a simple success narrative into something more complex and human. I spent years trying to fix something that was never broken, my mother admitted in her interview. Grace didn't need fashion advice from us. We needed to learn how to see beauty and success in forms we didn't recognize. The Vogue issue hit newsstands in September, timed to coincide with the major fashion weeks and the industry's most important season. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The cover sold out within days, and digital engagement numbers broke records for the magazine. But more significant than the commercial success was the cultural conversation the cover sparked. Fashion blogs analyzed every detail of the photographs, from the casual styling to the meaningful location choices. Business publications examined the Found Treasures business model as an example of how authentic brands could achieve massive success without traditional marketing approaches. The most meaningful response came from readers who saw themselves reflected in my story. Women who had felt judged for their fashion choices, entrepreneurs who had been told their visions weren't commercial enough, families who recognized their own dynamics in the interviews my relatives had given. One letter particularly moved me, from a grandmother in Ohio who wrote, "I've been sewing clothes for my granddaughter because we can't afford designer pieces, and she's been embarrassed to wear them to school. After seeing your Vogue cover and reading your story, she asked me to teach her to sew. She said she wants to create beautiful things that don't look expensive, just like you do." These responses reinforced my belief that fashion could be a force for empowerment rather than exclusion, that success stories could inspire rather than intimidate. The Vogue cover opened doors that had previously seemed permanently closed. Luxury retailers who had once considered Found Treasures too accessible began requesting exclusive collections. High-end department stores that catered to clients who typically bought only established designer labels started incorporating my pieces into their most prestigious sections. But the opportunity that excited me most came from an unexpected source: the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Costume Institute was planning an exhibition about the evolution of American fashion, and they wanted Found Treasures to represent the current era's redefinition of luxury. "Your work embodies a uniquely American approach to fashion," explained Dr. Patricia Williams, the exhibition's curator, during our initial meeting. "The idea that luxury should be accessible, that quality doesn't require exclusivity, that confidence trumps conspicuous consumption, these are values that define contemporary American style." Working with the Met meant my designs would be preserved alongside pieces by legendary American designers like Claire McCardell, Norman Norell, and Ralph Lauren. The permanent collection would include several Found Treasures pieces, as examples of how 21st-century designers were redefining the relationship between fashion and authenticity. The exhibition opening became a celebration not just of my work, but of the broader movement toward more inclusive definitions of luxury and success. Fashion industry leaders, museum patrons, and cultural critics gathered to examine how American fashion was evolving beyond traditional European models of exclusivity and aspiration. During my speech at the opening reception, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, my family worried that I didn't understand fashion, I told the assembled crowd. Tonight, my work is being celebrated alongside the greatest names in American design history. The difference isn't that I changed my aesthetic or my values. The difference is that the world finally caught up to a vision that was always valid. The success of the Met exhibition coincided with another milestone: Found Treasures' 10th anniversary. What had started as a small online venture selling designs that looked casual but incorporated luxury techniques had evolved into a major fashion house with global reach and cultural influence. To celebrate the anniversary, I decided to return to my roots with a capsule collection inspired by the very outfit my family had mocked at that transformative barbecue. The pieces looked exactly like clothes someone might assemble from thrift store finds, but each incorporated a decade's worth of technical innovations and sustainable practices. The anniversary collection sold out within hours of its release, proving that the appetite for authentic luxury had only grown stronger as the fashion industry became increasingly focused on sustainability and social responsibility. Customers weren't just buying clothes, they were investing in a philosophy that aligned with their values. But the most personally meaningful aspect of the 10th anniversary was the celebration dinner my family organized in my honor. The same relatives who had once criticized my fashion choices now gathered to toast my achievements and acknowledge how completely they had misunderstood my potential. "I want to apologize publicly," Victoria announced during her toast, her voice carrying across the private dining room we had reserved for the occasion. "Not just for the comments I made about Grace's clothes, but for the assumptions I made about her character and her capabilities. She saw possibilities where I saw problems, and she had the courage to pursue her vision even when those closest to her couldn't see its value." My father, who had always been the most practical voice in family discussions about my career, surprised everyone with his emotional response. I spent Grace's entire childhood teaching her to be realistic, to choose safe paths, to avoid risks, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But the greatest risk would have been if she had listened to me. If she had chosen security over authenticity, we would have lost not just her incredible talent, but her example of what's possible when you believe in yourself completely. These acknowledgments felt like the final chapter in a story that had begun with criticism and misunderstanding. My family had not only learned to accept my choices, but had grown from the experience of discovering how wrong their initial judgments had been. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with Emma, Victoria's daughter, who was now in college studying sustainable business practices. She had become one of Found Treasure's most passionate advocates, not just as a customer, but as someone who understood the broader implications of building ethical companies. "You changed our entire family's perspective on success," Emma told me as we walked through the restaurant's garden after dinner. "Before your story came out, we measured everything by traditional markers: salary, title, address, brand names. Now we ask different questions about what makes a life meaningful." This shift in family values reflected broader changes happening throughout society. The Found Treasure's story had become a touchstone for discussions about authenticity, sustainable business practices, and the courage required to challenge conventional wisdom. As my career entered its second decade, I began receiving invitations to speak at universities, business conferences, and cultural institutions about the lessons learned from building an authentic brand in an industry known for artifice and aspiration. These speaking engagements allowed me to articulate the philosophy that had guided Found Treasures from its inception. Authenticity isn't just about being true to yourself, I explained during a keynote at Harvard Business School. It's about having the courage to remain consistent with your values even when external pressures encourage compromise. It's about building something that matters more than something that simply succeeds. The questions from business students revealed how completely the entrepreneurial landscape had shifted. Instead of asking about scaling rapidly or achieving maximum profitability, they wanted to understand how to build companies that aligned with their personal values and contributed positively to society. "How do you maintain authenticity when success brings pressure to expand beyond your original vision?" asked one student during the Q&A session. "By remembering that growth without purpose is just expansion," I replied. "Every decision we make at Found Treasures is filtered through our core question: does this help people feel more confident in their authentic selves? If the answer is no, we don't do it, regardless of the potential profits." These conversations with the next generation of entrepreneurs reinforced my belief that the business world was experiencing a fundamental shift toward more conscious, values-driven approaches to success. Found Treasures had become an early example of what this new paradigm could achieve. The impact extended beyond fashion and business into broader cultural discussions about self-acceptance and the courage required to live authentically. My story had become a case study in psychology courses about family dynamics and self-esteem, in sociology classes about social expectations and individual agency, in women's studies programs about challenging patriarchal definitions of success. Grace Chen's journey illustrates the psychological cost of seeking external validation, wrote Dr. Jennifer Park in her analysis for the Journal of Social Psychology. Her family's inability to recognize her achievements forced her to develop internal measures of worth, which ultimately proved more sustainable and fulfilling than conventional markers of success. These academic perspectives added depth to understanding why the Found Treasures story resonated so broadly. It wasn't just about fashion or business success. It was about the universal challenge of remaining true to yourself when others expect you to be someone different. As I approached the 15th anniversary of founding Found Treasures, I realized that the company had evolved into something far beyond what I had originally envisioned. What started as a fashion brand had become a platform for conversations about authenticity, sustainability, family dynamics, and the changing definition of success in contemporary society. The business metrics were certainly impressive. Found Treasures now generated over $200 million in annual revenue, employed nearly 300 people across multiple locations, and had expanded into home goods, accessories, and lifestyle products that all embodied the same philosophy of understated luxury. But the measurements that mattered most to me were different. The letters from customers who felt empowered by wearing clothes that reflected their authentic taste rather than prescribed trends. The young designers who cited found treasures as inspiration for pursuing their own unconventional visions. The families who had learned to celebrate individual authenticity rather than demanding conformity to collective expectations. The ultimate validation came when the Smithsonian Institution requested several found treasures pieces for their permanent collection, documenting American innovation in the 21st century. The acquisition would place my work alongside inventions and cultural artifacts that had fundamentally changed how Americans lived and thought about themselves. Your contribution to American culture extends far beyond fashion, explained Dr. Michael Chen, the curator overseeing the acquisition. Found treasures represents a shift in how Americans define luxury, success, and authenticity. These pieces will help future generations understand this pivotal moment in our cultural evolution. Standing in my design studio, surrounded by sketches for future collections and samples of innovative sustainable materials, I often think about that transformative evening at my grandmother's barbecue. The night when my family's criticism catalyzed a revelation that changed not just my own life but influenced broader conversations about authenticity and success. The girl they had mocked for her thrift store aesthetic had built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while staying completely true to the vision they had once dismissed. More importantly, she had proved that authentic success looks different from conventional expectations, and that the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself with unwavering consistency and confidence. Victoria visits the studio regularly now, bringing her daughter Emma, and often staying for hours to discuss everything from design philosophy to family dynamics. Our relationship has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during those years when she felt compelled to offer fashion advice I didn't need or want. "I think about that night all the time," she told me during her most recent visit. "How confident I was that I understood style and success better than you did. How completely wrong I was about everything that actually mattered. Your patience with our ignorance taught me more about grace than any etiquette class ever could have." My mother has become Found Treasures' most enthusiastic ambassador among her social circle, proudly wearing pieces that she now understands represent the pinnacle of sophisticated design. But more meaningful than her changed fashion choices is her transformed approach to relationships with all her children. "I learned to ask instead of assuming," she explains when people comment on our family's changed dynamics. "Grace taught me that love means supporting who someone actually is, rather than trying to shape them into who you think they should become." These personal transformations reflect the broader cultural impact that extends far beyond the fashion industry. Found Treasures has become synonymous with the courage required to live authentically, the wisdom to recognize value that doesn't announce itself, and the confidence to trust your own vision even when others can't see its worth. The company continues to grow and evolve, but always within the framework of the original philosophy that luxury should be accessible, beauty should be understated, and success should be measured by meaningful impact rather than mere profitability. Each new collection, each business decision, each public appearance is filtered through the same questions that guided those early days. Does this help people feel more confident in their authentic selves? And does this contribute to a more inclusive definition of success and beauty? As I look toward the future, I see endless possibilities for expanding these ideas into new areas and reaching new audiences. The next generation of consumers values authenticity and sustainability in ways that align perfectly with everything Found Treasures represents. The business world is increasingly recognizing that companies built on genuine values achieve more sustainable success than those focused solely on profits. But the most exciting aspect of the future is watching other people find the courage to pursue their own authentic visions. Inspired by the example of what becomes possible when you refuse to compromise your core values for external approval. The letters, emails, and messages I receive from entrepreneurs, artists, and individuals who have found strength in the Found Treasures story remind me daily that the most important achievements are often the ones that happen quietly, person by person, as people discover their own capacity for authenticity and courage. The woman who was once criticized for her thrift store aesthetic became living proof that the most valuable things often hide in plain sight, waiting for someone confident enough to recognize their worth. Sometimes the greatest revolution is simply being yourself, consistently and completely, until the world catches up to your vision. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is showing up as exactly who you are, regardless of who others think you should be. Found Treasures became more than a fashion brand. It became evidence that authentic vision, pursued with patience and integrity, can change not just industries but entire cultural conversations about worth, beauty, and the courage required to live as your truest self. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.